Hey, it's Chad Brown. Welcome to the Disability Expert Podcast, where we talk about all things disability. Once again, back with Aaron Dalton. Aaron, how's it going?
Good. Glad to be back.
Today, we're going to talk about the role of doctors in the Social Security disability claim. And, we had thought about doing an episode where we really talked heavily about letters of support and notes of support. And I think we're going to come back to that at some point. But one of the things I think people really misunderstand is when you're trying to build a disability case, you are inevitably going to have to impact the healthcare professionals, doctors, physician extenders, PAs, nurse practitioners. And what the client always runs to is, well, my doctor supports me, or I'm going to get a letter of support. But the reality is, a lot of doctors won't do letters of support. When they do them, they're often poor, despite our clear explanations for how these letters should be done. They seem to know better, don't have time. In some respects, they carry a lot of weight. In other respects, judges tend to discount them at times for various reasons that make no sense, which is why we have a federal court practice.
Exactly.
But outside of these specific letters of support, the role of doctors in building a disability case is foundational to you developing evidence, having the notes of support that you need, documenting what's going on with you. At one level, doctors are a necessary, component. And when I say doctors, we also include nurse practitioners and PAs, because a lot of times that's who's actually treating our clients. Because there are no disability cases without medical evidence.
Yes.
In fact, you want to just recite real quick? What do the rules say about the ability to win a disability case if you don't actually have objective medical evidence?
Yeah. So one thing that I the way I explain it to clients is, if you were on trial for committing a crime, we could not just roll up into court and say, well, he didn't do it, therefore he shouldn't be convicted.
Right.
When we are doing a disability case, we cannot just show up in front of the judge and say, well, my client's clearly disabled. He testified he's in pain all day. We have to have medical records to back that up. So what Social Security looks at is not just what are your diagnoses. What they're looking for is, what are your diagnoses, what symptoms do those diagnoses cause, and how are those symptoms impacting your ability to compete in a competitive job market?
Yeah, we talk about, we have a book coming out too, by the way. We're going to do an episode on the book. I don't even know if I told them that there's a book coming out.
There's a book coming out if you didn't know.
There's a book coming out if you didn't know. And one of the things we talk about in the book is what we call the golden chain of evidentiary progression. And the golden chain of evidentiary progression is the idea that you must have a diagnosis that produces symptoms that produce functional limitations, okay? Very often, the functional limitations are going to be a hybrid of either a logical outworking of what the medical condition and symptoms are. You have an amputation below the knee, and you have a altered gait, or you have difficulty standing, right? And sometimes the functional limitation is going to be your actual experience from the symptoms. But a lot of times when people come into our office, they hyper-focus on one of the three. They hyper-focus on, well, I'm diagnosed with this, or I have this symptom, or I can't sit, stand, and walk, where in the reality, the way you win disability case is producing this golden chain of evidentiary progression, where you move from diagnosis to symptom to functional limitation. And in case you don't know, that diagnosis needs to come from a doctor,
Yes.
by and large, or healthcare provider. And so the role of the doctor in any disability case at some level starts with the fact that you're not going to be approved if you don't have medical documentation documenting that you have a diagnosis. There's other issues that you go through. There's a 12-month durational requirement. Obviously, this diagnosis has to last for 12 months. It has to prevent you from being able to engage in full-time sustained activity without accommodation or assistance. We've gone through that in other episodes as well. Ultimately, you're going to have an RFC, which is talking about what your residual functional capacity is, what you're capable of doing in light of this. But to start with, you need to understand there must be a diagnosis. If you don't have medical treatment, that might come from the consultative exam. Just did 2 episodes on that. If you haven't seen the consultative exam episodes, go see them. But the reality is that the role of the doctor is central to the disability case because ultimately you need a diagnosis.
Yes.
And that's going to come from a doctor most of the time. So let's talk about ways that doctors engage with you in a disability case or in your life that manifests itself in the disability case. Let's talk about objective evidence. So what is objective evidence versus subjective evidence? Let's just start by giving people some vocabulary. What are we talking about? We talk about objective evidence.
So an objective piece of evidence is something that is based on clinical or laboratory testing. We're talking about X-rays, MRIs, nerve conduction tests, things that we can point to and say, look, there's a test that documents this thing. Subjective is your reports. It's how bad this hurts for me today.
Right. And objective evidence is universally going to come almost always from an order from the doctor.
Yes.
So the other thing, in addition to objective evidence, and this falls, I guess, under a broad category of objective evidence, would be your medical records. Now, we're going to talk about how you talk to your doctor about disability, because even though we're not going to get into letters of support today, how you communicate with your doctor about your disability case and your medical conditions is imperative to producing the type of record we can win a case on. But let's talk about medical records generally. Most people know what medical records are. They're the doctors are required to keep either notes of their treatment of you, or in some cases they have to produce a summary of your treatment when we get into sort of psychological or counseling. But talk about medical records generally. This is a really misunderstood part of the practice, even though we spend most of our life reviewing them. Can you talk sort of about medical records, what they look like, what are problems with them, and how they are part of the doctor's role in disability case?
The first thing to understand about medical records today is most of them are electronically generated. It's very rare for us to be looking at a file now with handwritten doctor's notes. And so the nice thing about electronic records is they're easy to use, they're portable. The downside is a lot of times they're not 100% accurate. There's a lot of carryovers.
So tell people what that means.
So it could be that the medical professional is checking boxes of symptoms or observations during one visit, and those boxes don't get changed to the next visit. Sometimes a note finds its way into your record and it just gets copied and pasted 18 times throughout the course of 3 years every time you're going in.
So one of the ways we see that too is sometimes in work history. Because you think about medical records, and generally you understand, you come in and you have a SOAP note or whatever you want to call it, and they're going to talk about what they see, what they observe, what your diagnosis are, what your medications are, what your complaints are. But there's another whole section typically in medical records that really sort of bleeds into this social functioning, activities of daily living. And in that, I think there's a couple of points people need to understand. One is often it is work history is in there. And so they'll say works as golly, I hate when these jobs are like construction or maintenance or lawn care or hairdresser or stuff that often fall under the off the books, right? They fall under they look like off the books jobs. And they say, works as a construction worker. or works as a maintenance worker or works as in lawn care, and that note just copies and copies and copies, and so we're doing a pre-hearing, or our staff's working up a case, and they're talking to you, and they're like, well, it says here in the notes that you're working as in lawn care. They get angry, like, what is it? And I was like, well, it's in your medical record. People understand that's copied, and do judges understand that? Well, yeah, sure they do. But is it an inconsistency in the record that now we're forced to deal with?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. How about activities of daily living, though? Because I think people misunderstand that there's also going to often be activities of daily living type notes in your medical notes as well. Talk about those a little bit.
Yes. So that nice little chat at the start of the visit with the medical professional, where you're telling them about the vacation you just got back from, or how much you enjoyed going to your kid's ball game over the weekend. A lot of times that finds its way into the medical records, and sometimes the nuance there does not.
Right.
So when we're in a hearing with the judge might ask, oh, now, Mrs. Smith, I see that you had a lovely cruise with your family this past July. How did you go on that with your wheelchair? And so now we're having to explain all of the details that didn't actually find their way into the medical records there.
It's sort of like the medical records are a summary.
Yes.
And unfortunately, it seems like a lot of times this part that gets summarized is the part that's most damaging.
Not helpful part.
Yeah, it's not helpful at all. So that leads us to the next thing I want to talk about, which is, if you look at the role of the doctor, they're going to be there to provide the diagnosis, which is huge. They're going to be the person who sends you for the objective testing. Understand sometimes, like, you need to be proactive in requesting maybe testing, and that gets into an area. You're going to have records that talk about activities of daily living, work history. All of this is really your doctor signing their name to the bottom of that note. The doctor is playing a huge role in framing your life in light of your medical condition. So one of the things I think is most misunderstood by people in the process, clients in the process, is how to talk to their doctor about their disability. So let's go through and focus on, we've sort of lay a foundation for what's in those records. Let's talk about some sort of pointers that we can give people this is how if you engage with your doctor properly, not only can we fix a lot of the problems, we can build a record where even if they won't give us a letter of support, we're going to have that foundation.
Yes.
Okay. So talk about that. Just talk about it generally. So you're having a conversation with your doctor. What are some of the problems that people have? What are some of the concerns they have, or the fears they have that sort of makes this process a little awkward for them?
I think one thing that can be hard for people is to sort of admit defeat, to say, the career that I've been in for 20 years and love doing is getting next to impossible for me. I used to love this job, and now I'm just dreading getting out of bed in the morning because of my health conditions. And so it can be really hard to, number one, internally admit that, and then number two, to say it to the doctor almost makes it real. But what I find very helpful when I'm looking at a medical record and getting ready for a hearing is to have that long-term conversation with the doctor. So a lot of people don't realize with Social Security cases, oftentimes we're getting medical records a year plus before the actual disability start date that we're asking for.
Sure.
So if I can point out to the judge, here it is 11 months before we actually left work. Here's the first note with the doctor where my client is telling the doctor, hey, I'm having these issues at work. What can we do about this? And then we have consistent treatment over the next 6 months, and the things aren't getting better. They're getting worse. And then finally we have the visit, which is really the start of the disability case, that says, doc, I just can't keep doing this. I think I need to file for disability. What are your thoughts? Right. And so then, even if we don't get a letter of support from that provider, when we have that longitudinal record and we have the conversation documented of, I think it might be reasonable for my patient to go ahead and file. They've really been struggling, and that's in the notes. That makes for a great disability case.
And Social Security is by and large going to limit their recovery of records or their investigation to about a year prior to the alleged onset date, which is the day you're telling Social Security that you became disabled. And, it's incumbent upon you to actually go get those additional records. They're not going to go back and get 3 or 4 records 3 or 4 years or 2 or 3 years before you say you became disabled. They're going to work under the assumption that they're not relevant. But, if you have an attorney, it's highly likely if you have a skilled attorney or an expert helping you, they're going to go back. They're going to know that. But if you're doing this on your own, understand you're going to need to go back and get those records, because often they're going to have meaningful conversations, assuming you actually had the conversation with your doctor. So let's talk about that a little bit. A lot of people are afraid to talk to their doctor about disability. I've learned a lot about family doctors over the years. Some of them are very kind, compassionate, caring people who talk to their clients very well. Some of them are sort of introverted diagnosticians. They're probably really good doctors, but they come in, they don't have a great bedside manner. They're not approachable. And so sometimes they're behind. And so you have these rushed appointments. And so our clients are like, well, he was busy, or he's not easy to talk to. What do our clients got to do when it comes to doctors and disability? Just generally, how do you deal with that?
I think it's really important to let the doctors know what's going on with you, not just within the confines of that exam room, giving the doctors that holistic view of what's going on with your life, letting them know, hey, I am applying for disability early on in the process. Sometimes even asking them, because I'm applying for disability, I would really like to make sure that my notes are accurate and detailed, because I know that that's going to be the difference between me, potentially being approved for disability or being denied is what these records say.
Yeah, and I think it's, that's important, though, is that they need to be accurate. They don't need to minimize your symptoms. They don't need to exaggerate your symptoms. Similar to conversations we had when we were talking about consultative exams, they need to not only be detailed, but have examples. So in this conversation you're having with your doctor, it's not like tell them everything that's going on, but if you have a knee problem, for example, right, and you find it difficult to stand and walk, you need to tell them, and look, I'm having difficulty walking. I can't, I go to Walmart and I have to stop every 10 minutes. It's important not only that you tell them that, but that you also tell them, I would really like you to include in my medical record the limitations and difficulties that I'm having in my daily life. By and large, there's no reason the doctor should not put that into the record. More importantly, one of the things you can do is sometimes you can tell if you're uncomfortable with your doctor, you can tell the medical assistant who comes in and does the initial exam, I'm applying for disability. I'm having a really hard time. I'm here to be seen today. They'll ask you that. Why are you here today? I'm here to be seen today because I'm having a lot of problems with my knee. This is how it's affecting me. Can you make sure the doctor knows to put that in my record? It's not as if there's not a conversation going on in the medical clinic between the medical assistant or maybe the nurse manager for the office and the doctor. So it's important for the doctor because they have to sign off on the note. But I think one of the biggest takeaways I could give people is you need to tell the doctor what's going on in your life as it relates to symptoms and functional limitations, because we're back to our golden chain. The doctor can give the diagnosis. He can make observations about symptoms. He can have functional limitations, but by and large, the functional limitations in most treatment is probably not having a huge impact on how they treat you. Now, there's always exceptions. Don't blow the comments up telling me, well, the limitation is why they need the cane. Well, yeah, for sure. But it's very rare that you get to that point unless you've had the conversation.
Right.
So use cane for an example. You need a prescription for a cane for it to carry any weight of significance in a Social Security case. If you're using a cane around the house, you need to tell them that. it's very easy to say, Judge, I'm using this walking stick that my great-grandpa Willie left me, but I would really like to have a 4-prong cane that's more stable and is a better device. Can you write me a prescription for that? The medical history's there, and usually they're going to say yes.
Right.
Now all of a sudden we have a case where you're using a prescribed cane to walk and assist you with your knee issue versus you using Great Uncle Willie's, walking stick, right?
Hand-whittled walking stick.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, what are your thoughts? I mean, how do we help people? How do we help our clients to do this thing that we know they need them to do?
Couple pieces of advice I try to share with clients is don't be afraid to tell the doctor when something's not working.
Right.
If this medication is not doing a good job for you, it's not going to hurt the doctor's feelings to tell them, hey, this didn't work. Can we try something else?
Yeah, sure.
And of course, that gets documented in the record that, okay, well, now, we tried 6 different prescriptions before we found the one that actually helped.
Right.
Same thing. This one can be a little bit more touchy, but if we're looking at surgery or really invasive procedures, it's okay to ask for a second opinion. If you feel like you're not exactly happy with the treatment you're getting, or you just want a second opinion before you go have this huge procedure done, that is okay. And that actually can demonstrate to the judge, hey, we explored all treatment avenues. This is what the consensus was.
Yeah. I mean, I think sort of the final takeaway, you've got to talk to your doctor about more than just the specific issue you're there for. You have to talk about how it's impacting you, what's going on in your life. If you're trying medical treatments that don't work, you can't just say, I stopped the medicine without telling them why. There were horrible side effects, right?
Exactly.
So have the conversation and then have the difficult conversation of saying, I need you to document this.
Right.
The other thing is, and this used to be a lot more difficult than it is today, most people have access to the portal. You have access to your medical records in the portal. Go in there and look and see if they're doing it. Because if they're not, the time to go back to them is right after the visit and say, hey, I checked out my records in the portal and you didn't document these things and I asked you to, and I want them updated to do that. Now, sometimes they'll put an addendum and now you got to explain that to the judge. But usually if you do that once or even twice, you won't have to keep having that conversation because they'll start putting those in the record. So I think have the conversation, talk in specifics, make sure they're in your record. And if you have to, you go back to them and ask them to put it in there because the role of the doctor in your case is huge. And one of the best things we can do is get accurate records that look at not only just diagnosis, but symptoms, functional limitations. We didn't get to letters of support. Next time. All right. We will have a future episode on letters of support. It will come at some point. I don't know. Sit on the edge of your seat waiting. That's a wrap, man. That's all we got. Doctors are super huge and important in the context of disability case. Get them to prepare the records correctly and accurately because that's what you need. You need to show that supportability and consistency and explain inconsistencies. And the records are a great way to doing that. And your doctor is the person who can help you do that. With that, that's a wrap. Subscribe. Until next time, take care.